ABC News contributor and presidential historian Mark Updegrove has more on this shooting and America's history of political violence. So, Mark, you compare today's political divisiveness to the 1960s. How is it similar, and what makes today different?
The 1960s were another time of great upheaval and discord and division. And we saw in that decade, in just 5 years, Diane, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, of Malcolm X, and in 1968 alone, the back-to-back assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. So again, another time of great change and great heated political rhetoric. I think today it's slightly different. I think you have a president in place who offers extreme views that get extremism from the other side. There was more moderation in the 1960s, at least among our political leaders. But you had things like the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War that were tearing Americans apart. The similarity here is that political violence does not solve our problems, and we have to realize that. We have to understand each other and know that in a democracy, we have competing views, and we have to offer ideas to counter those views. That's the solution in a democracy, not violence.
Mark, you say a lot of the divisiveness we see today has to do with a fragmented media landscape. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think social media gives us an opportunity to purvey extreme views from one side or the other with absolute impunity. And it gets us angered and enraged. And for social media purveyors, that enragement means engagement. It's good for them. It's good for their business. So they don't discourage this. I think we have to understand that these devices add to the divisions that we see in our country and be more responsible with what we're putting out there, despite the fact that it doesn't come back to stick us, despite the fact that we can do so with impunity. We shouldn't do it because that affects the social fabric of our country. That creates to the divisions that we're seeing today, Diane.
In response to this shooting, President Trump said, and I'm quoting here, "It's long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are a tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree." What do you make of his message, especially as the target of 2 assassination attempts himself?
I think he's absolutely right. We have to worry about the way that we are communicating, and the media is a means of doing that. I think the responsible message for all leaders in our country is to say that this should stop, and we should prevent extremism on both sides of the aisle. You had that litany of violence that was mentioned in the piece, Diane, and that's on both sides of this. That's on the right and that's on the left. It's happening from all sides, not just the left, as in the case of Charlie Kirk. We don't know what the motivations of the assassin were, but we can assume that that assassin disagreed with the views of Charlie Kirk. But we're seeing that on the other side too. We have to understand that it's not just one side, it's both. It is extremism that we need to prevent in this country.
Looking back at the 1960s and how Americans came out of that, where do we go from here as a nation? How do we get out of this?
Lady Bird Johnson, who was the first lady for the bulk of the 1960s for 5 years and 2 months, said, "The clash of ideas is the sound of freedom." We are entitled as Americans. We're entitled to our own views. That's freedom of speech. That's what a democracy looks like. But a democracy can be messy. And again, we have to understand that this is not the solution. This violence is not the way to go forward. We have to listen to one another. We have to try to understand one another, and we have to try to go forward as a nation, as hard as that might be at certain times when we hear views that are so counter to what we ourselves believe, Diane.
Charlie Kirk was a man with a lot of critics and a lot of fans. What do you think his legacy will be?
Well, I don't. It depends. He was a leader who had great charisma and great impact. This is somebody who really galvanized the youth. There was no expectation that Trump would get 45% of the youth vote, which he did in 2024. That's much higher than many people believed he would get, and that was largely because of the effective movement that Charlie Kirk waged. I think he is a very difficult leader to replace. And there may be a void among the youth, given the fact that we will no longer have Charlie Kirk's voice. He may be martyred. There might be people who rise up and try to fill that gap, or it may not. It remains to be seen what happens when you have somebody this large with a voice this loud who fades from the scene, Diane.
And is the bigger impact the loss of that person and you know all the events he would have spoken out presumably, or does it potentially have a bigger impact that now his death is raising so much attention to his cause?
Well, I think that's the thing. If he is martyred in this moment and people rally to the cause, then I think in terms of the movement, his death would not have been in vain. That movement will continue to be sustained. But again, when you have somebody that major, movements can fade. We saw with Dr. Martin Luther King, who was assassinated in 1968, that the civil rights movement that Dr. King led never quite was able to sustain that continued forward movement because he was such an effective leader. We had somebody here again who was an enormously impactful and effective leader. Again, we'll see what happens, whether somebody can come in and fill that void.
And Mark, we just had a guest on, Kyle Spencer, who was saying there are sort of two factions on how to respond to this. Some are calling to turn down the rhetoric, to end the division, to come together and learn how to disagree. And then there are others who feel galvanized by this and say, you know, essentially, this is war. Does history tell you anything about what determines which direction this country goes in?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are a lot of factors here, a lot of variables. One hopes that this does not lead to a war. No side, no victor or loser wins in a war, particularly in the United States of America. We are a less effective nation when we are divided. So I'm hopeful that this leads to something where we can reconcile.
All right. Our thanks to Mark Updegrove.